Welcome to another episode of the Coach Up Podcast Extension. I am very excited to have with me today Charlotte Rooney. Welcome, Charlotte, for being here. We are going to be talking about women in leadership and the challenges and the fears that come up with effectively leading a team, and not just from the leader standpoint, but also from the team standpoint, how the fears that they encounter with having a female as a leader. And while we think in 2024, almost 2025, this should not be an issue, it is. And so we deal in reality because that's the only way that we move through any fears that we actually have. And so Charlotte is an expert in how to do that. And so Charlotte, please tell people who you are, what you do specifically. I've given a little bit of a teaser, and who you help. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Yes, my name is Charlotte Rooney. I am an executive and team performance coach. And so I work with women who are in senior management roles, leading teams of typically at least 3 people. And I help them to basically have more impact as leaders by learning how to leverage their own strengths, their own authentic way of leading, and also leverage their team so that everybody is happy and engaged and motivated, delivering at their highest level and really enjoying what they do. Because, I don't know if you know this one, but recent research suggests that your manager has as much impact on your mental health as your domestic partner. Much more impact than your therapist or doctor if you are engaging with one of them for your mental health. So that role as a leader, not only do you have that responsibility for delivering what your team needs to deliver, what your business needs to deliver, there's a huge impact on that pastoral side as well. And I want everybody to live a good life. I want people to enjoy their lives. And we spend a lot of time at work. So I think figuring out how to optimize that for everybody is just definitely worth spending some time on.
That is a statistic to just hit you in the face with. Oh my goodness. But it makes complete sense because we say so often you spend as much time at work as you do with family, friends, and sometimes more. So the people that you're surrounding yourself with and that you're surrounded with have an impact on your mental health.
Absolutely. And that we often talk about kind of work-life balance as though work isn't part of our life. And I think that's just such a mistaken way of thinking about it, because it can be an incredible source of purpose and meaning and connection when we get it right. And I think that leaders have a great opportunity there. And, at the risk of potentially putting something out there that feels a little sexist, I think women leaders particularly are really well suited to lean into that side of leadership, because as a general rule, at a sort of population level, they tend to be more comfortable with the people side of leadership, with the more emotional side of leadership, which I think is a really important part of this creating a healthy atmosphere for people to work in.
But I would imagine that a lot of women are afraid to lean into that emotional connection, nurturing type of leadership in a environment where business is business. Emotions don't come into it. It's all about data, numbers, results, effectiveness, productivity. And so how do you work with your clients to get them to embrace those attributes that can make them the better leader of the two sexes?
Yeah, there is definitely often they typically wouldn't call it a fear. It's interesting. They might talk about a worry. I worry about how this will be perceived, or I worry that I'm spending too much time on the personal side, or I worry that it comes out the other way as well, of saying, I worry that I'm not spending enough time with my team. I had one client recently tell me that in a very busy period when she was understaffed and, doing the job of 3 people, that she felt like a ghost in her own team because she wasn't finding that time for connection with everybody on a daily basis that she normally would. So they don't necessarily see it as a fear, but it's definitely something that plays on their mind. And they worry that, well, either they worry that, what they are doing is going to make somebody upset, or that what they are doing will be perceived as less useful than chasing after those goals, or, kind of going through the data with people and actually stopping and saying, hey, how are we all feeling about the progress that we're making right now? Or the progress that we're not making right now, which really is the piece where it becomes even more important.
Yeah. I'm so glad you made that distinction, because Charlotte, that's one of the things that I talk about when I speak to individuals about how do we move through fear? How do we forge through the fear? And you use the word worry, right? I'm concerned about, I have this continual thought that something may not be well in this situation. And I like to say, people may not agree with me on this, but I like to say we mislabel that. It's an effective term, but ultimately I'm afraid of something in that worry. And so it's based in fear. But we don't like to use the word fear, right? We don't like to say, I'm afraid of something, or this is scaring me, because it does diminish our power. I appreciate the fact that you said, sometimes they feel less useful. And we feel like, if I say I'm afraid of something, or if I acknowledge something as fear, or I label it as fear, then I don't have as much control over it, or it's something that is happening to me. And I don't know if I have the power to move through it, or if it's something that I'm just stuck with, right? Like a fear of heights. People go through their whole life and think, I'm afraid of heights. You can't change that, right? But we think it's a static thing, and it's not. And so I really appreciate the fact that we do label things so that it's more comfortable, more palatable for us. And it does accurately describe what's happening. But we still have to acknowledge what is the basis underneath that worry in order to move forward. And so I want to tackle when you talked about feeling less useful. I love that you said, if you're actually addressing the emotional needs of your employees, you're actually going to improve productivity and work. But because that's not talked about, then people may say, okay, from a perception of my company standpoint, I'm spending time on something that they wouldn't see as valuable. So how do you help them to move through that and hone that power to say, okay, this is what I need to do in order to tackle not feeling, instead of feeling less useful, to feel more useful through leaning into being more emotionally supportive for my team members?
There's basically two approaches that we can take. There's a kind of cognitive, rational, thought-based approach, which is the one that people are probably most likely to be familiar with. And it's usually, to be honest, the one that I start with. And then there is an unconscious, emotions-based approach, which I bring in with clients who are more comfortable with their emotional life, or clients who have a tendency to feel first and think second, rather than the ones who tend to think first and feel second. So I personally, I'm a think first, feel second kind of person. That's the way I experience my emotional response. But I know a lot of people are the reverse. So the kind of cognitive approach, as I said, it's one that many people may be quite familiar with. And it's, so like you were saying, that kind of worry and anxiety, it comes not from the thing itself, right? Because anxiety is fear about something that may never happen or may not have happened yet. And so it's caused by the way you think about the thing that is coming. So the way that we tackle that in a cognitive way is we go in on those thoughts. And you ask someone, well, what are you afraid of? And typically they say, oh, I'm not afraid. What are you talking about? and so, okay,
Nothing.
well, what are you worried about? What are you worried will happen if you do the thing that you say you're going to do, or if you don't do the thing that you don't want to do? And we kind of go through and we look at, okay, well, is that realistic? Is that actually likely to happen? And sometimes just saying it out loud is enough for someone to kind of laugh it off and say, actually, no, you're right. That's a really crazy thing to be afraid of. So I had a client that I was working with who told me that whenever she had to write a difficult email, and by difficult, she meant an email where she was saying something that she thought the other person didn't want to hear. Maybe she was refusing a request or explaining why she wasn't going to do something or why they weren't going to change a policy. She told me that she would often spend her entire admin hour on the single response because she was worried about what the other person would think and feel when they read it. And so she wanted to make sure, and she cared deeply about them being happy. And so she wanted to make sure that she had given it due care and attention. But really what it was is it was a kind of procrastination thing that she was doing to avoid sending the email that she thought somebody else was not going to want to hear. And when we kind of dove into that, she was kind of, we'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But she was like, that's not it. That's not the only thing that's stopping me. And as we kept going, we realized that she was equating the time that she took with the amount of care that the other person would know that she had taken. And so even though she knew right from the start that basically her answer was going to be no in so many words, she felt that if she didn't take several rewrites, if she didn't sit on it and worry about it, she was doing the other person a disservice. And that was her real fear, was being seen as not being empathetic, being seen as not caring.
Which the interesting thing there is, the other person never knew any of that. None of that was based on reality. It goes back to the cognitive portion of how we're thinking. And so your approach to tackle the cognitive portion about why is this worry? Why is this concern here? Really diving into that basically reveals that it's all fantasy.
It's unnecessary.
Right.
And for her, that was enough for her to go, okay, actually, I don't need to do this. I don't need to spend an hour on this response.
Mm-hmm.
I do still feel, she would say, I do still feel that I'm not going to dash off one line. I do want to think about the way I word it. I want to be compassionate. But she went from taking an hour, 2 hours to being able to write one in, say, 15 minutes and feel really comfortable about it.
So, Charlotte, that is powerful.
Yeah.
Because I have experienced that myself. And now that you say that, I think, was that part of the reason why I have in the past, and I still do, take time to write responses. I will read them over and over again before I send them. And I often wish, why can't I just be that person to dash off a line and say, there we go. So thank you for sharing that. I'm now curious because you mentioned the think first, feel second, feel first, think second method. So I'm now curious for the feel first, think second method.
Yeah. So when we want to come at it from an emotional perspective first, this works best when you ask someone kind of, what are you thinking? What are you worried? And they don't really have a good answer. So the people who are aware of their thought process, so like this client, she was able to tell me really quickly, oh, this is what I'm thinking when it's happening. But sometimes, you might ask and people say, I don't know. I don't want to do it. It's particularly true with procrastination, which is another form of fear. Usually, we're worried about the experience of doing something, or we're worried about the effect of doing it. And so we put off an action. And so in this case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break the habit of falling into the pattern of being afraid and avoiding the activity. And your brain runs fancily on heuristics, but basically what those are is kind of like click-run patterns that save a lot of energy in your brain. And your brain's primary function is to keep you alive. Its secondary function is to save as much energy as possible. And so it loves habits. And procrastination is a habit that shows up like that. And so a certain thing happens and it triggers a program in your brain, and you run down the emotional road of being like, oh, I don't think I want to do that. I'm afraid that something's going to go wrong. You find something else to do and you don't do the thing that you want. So what we need to do on an emotional level is we need to break that programming. We need to interrupt the pattern and replace the procrastination, the fear emotion, with a different emotion, the emotion that you want to feel instead when you are about to take that activity. So, for example, I was working with a client who had taken over a team from, I don't like to use this word, but this is the way they describe it, a previously very toxic leader. She had taken over and the team had been suffering for a while. They were really stressed. There were a lot of people who were on the brink of burnout. I mean, kind of a little bit traumatized almost from the way that this leader had been acting. And so she had come in and she had done a lot of work, kind of rebuilding everybody, getting them back to feeling confident. But in the process of that, she had taken on a lot of activities, which she did to kind of relieve the burden, to give people space to think and connect with each other and kind of breathe. But it wasn't a sustainable, ongoing model. You know, she was a C-suite leader. She was doing stuff that really should have been done kind of almost by an assistant, but she just gathered everything in to give people that healing space. And we were coming back around to the time where she really needed to start handing them back. And she was like, I plan to do this. Every time I have a one-to-one with my reports, I plan to have this conversation. Okay, you need to take these things back. And then we get in the conversation and I start talking about their family and their kids. And then the next thing I know, it's done and I haven't had the conversation. And I think we've all been there, some variant of that, you know, where we need to have a difficult, unpleasant conversation, or a conversation that we anticipate will be difficult. And man, do we avoid it, even though we know we should.
Correct. I have been there. I can relate.
Yeah. And I asked her, you know, I tried the cognitive approach, saying, well, what are you afraid is going to happen? What are you thinking? And she's like, I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, okay, well, let's go back to the last time this happened. Take yourself right back into that moment. And it's almost like a visualization exercise. It's like a really embodying that memory. And you can close your eyes. You want to get really into the moment. What can you see and feel and touch and as much detail as possible, because we're kind of trying to activate that part of your brain just before the procrastination happens. And then you tell the story and we get to the point where she's just about to say it and she doesn't. I'm like, stop. What's happening? What can you see? What can you feel? What can you hear? And it turned out there was a little bit of her brain that was imagining the look on the person's face when she said, we need to make some changes. You need to take back these reports that I've taken from you. And she was imagining a look of horror on their face. She was imagining them kind of crumbling in front of her because it was too much. And that was the trigger that was sending her, instead of down the conversation route of, I'm going to talk to you about what you can start taking back to me, it's going on the route of, and so, hey, how's your wife? Really? Oh, yeah, it was really lovely to see her last week at the picnic.
We'd prefer to create a picture of happiness and joy on the face, running away from the picture of horror that's being imagined.
Of course we do. Of course we do. So now once we got the trigger point, that's where the fear is coming in. She's afraid of that face that she's imagining she's going to see. She hasn't even seen it, but she's imagining that she's going to see it. Yeah. And so what we need to do is we need to replace that fear with the feeling that she wants to have. And she wanted to feel kind, but purposeful. So then you take someone to a memory where the last time they felt that. And it's usually something totally unrelated, but they can remember a time when they felt that way. And you follow a similar idea. You go right to that memory and you get inside it, almost like pulling it on like a skin, until you can feel how it feels in your body. And it feels differently for everybody. You know, some people, you know, for me, that kind of feeling, there's kind of a warmth in my chest. There's a little bit of a tingle in my fingers. There's a slight set in my jaw. That's the purposefulness for me. It comes in a little bit of set in there. And so you find that, and then you flip back to the image of the face that's making her not want to do it. And you go backwards and forwards between those two, going into the moment where you want to take the action and the fear is stopping you, to the emotion that you want to have instead of fear, until you basically collapse those into yourself on an unconscious cognitive level. And with practice, what that means is when you then see that when the trigger happens, you're in that conversation, you no longer imagine the fear face. And so you don't feel afraid, and so you don't procrastinate, and so you're able to move forwards.
That's a powerful exercise, and I'm so glad you said it takes practice, because Charlotte, hearing you say it, I think there is no way I would be able to do this. But as with anything, practice, we can learn to do, we can learn to do anything. And so it, you said something that I thought was really interesting in giving that example about your client, that she saw a picture of horror on a person's face and that created the feeling. And it made me think about the fact that when we are being attacked by fear, there's a fear of something, that visualization can be so powerful. And it can be a tool that we use to move through the fear. How do we change the picture that we have in our mind that then will change how we feel about the situation, which then, because fear is a thing, but it's also a feeling, that feeling can then be changed because I see something different happening in my mind than what I'm imagining, which is causing the fear. And her example is a perfect example. She was seeing horror on somebody's faces, and that's why she was afraid to continue the conversation. And so I want people to, you guys listening, take that away. Charlotte just gave an amazing example, but change the picture in your mind, change how you're visualizing things to occur, and the fear will go away, because part of fear is expectation not being met, right? And us setting an expectation of something horrible versus what we want to have happen, and then afraid that the thing that is horrible that we're imagining will actually come to pass. And so thank you for sharing that. That's a very powerful one. I bet you have another common fear that you work with your clients on in helping them to become stronger, better, more effective leaders. And so tell me one more.
Sure. So one that comes up often, many of my clients would semi-jokingly describe themselves as control freaks. And one thing that they avoid and tend not to like doing is giving up control or delegating. And this, I think, you're talking at the beginning about how, sometimes there are fears that teams have when they are thinking about women being leaders. And I think this can be one that can come up for people when they get a new team leader, regardless of their gender, actually. Is, what is their style going to be like? Is their leadership style going to suit me as a member of the team? And for many people, that means, are they going to let me continue to do the things that I used to do? Am I, as a team member, going to still have that same level of power and autonomy that I used to have? Both of those things are really important for people's motivation, particularly autonomy. And so that sort of self-described tendency to want to be in control, to want to hold on to things, which is a corresponding fear of failure, basically. If I let somebody else do this, if I let go of control, it's going to go wrong. And so, yeah, this one comes up a lot. And the example I'm going to give on this one is actually the way I got over this. So when I was at McKinsey, I was having a very bad project one time, project that I was leading, and it was not going to plan at all. And I was responding to that by trying to do everything myself. I was clamping down on my team, trying to take back control because I was absolutely terrified that it was all going to go wrong. And I remember having a conversation with my mentor, which went something along the lines of, this is an absolute disaster. I must work. I've got to take this back. I've got to do it myself because the deck isn't going to be ready for the partner when they arrive at the client site. They're flying from Germany to California. It's not going to be ready. They're not going to have it the night before, and this is going to be an absolute disaster. And she just looked at me and went, "So what?" And I was like, "So it means that, they won't be able to deliver the session in front of the client, and the client will be angry, and they'll end the engagement." And she's like, "So what?" And I went, "So we'll lose the contract, and then the partner who won the contract, whose client this is, they'll be furious with me and I'll get fired." And she went, "So what?" And this is the thing about fear, right? We stop, because in my brain, I had stopped at that point always. I had been catastrophizing. And the moment where in my brain, I was visualizing the partner firing me because I had not delivered this thing on time. I mean, to be fair, this would not have actually happened. This was definitely, that is not the type of reaction I would have gotten. But in my brain, this is what was happening. But I stopped my visualization at the catastrophe point for me, which was I got fired. And she went, so what? And that blew my mind. The idea that I felt like I had just dropped the ultimate worst possible thing that could ever happen. And she was just like, it's not a problem.
Things will go on.
She's like, do you think you'll never get another job? Do you imagine yourself, losing your house and starving in the hedgerows, or possibly living in a cardboard box with the rats under London Bridge? And I was like, no, I don't imagine that. I stopped at this one point. And so this is another trick that I absolutely love. And it's just the so what spiral. Just keep asking yourself, so what? The point when you think it's the worst that could possibly happen, ask yourself, so what? Because either subconsciously, you genuinely think that this thing is going to end in a so what where you die. And usually that's not true. And usually we can see that as we go through it. Or you'll realize that, like me, actually the worst that you can imagine is completely survivable and would be totally fine. I mean, it wouldn't be pleasant. Nobody's saying, you'd be happy about it. But it's not that paralyzing be all and end all that your fear is trying to make it.
And that is so key. Our fear makes things seem as though it is the be all end all. If if this happens, the world is going to collapse. Life is going to stop. Nobody's going to talk to me ever again. I will live under a bridge with the rats in a box. And that's just not true. And I'm taking it step by step of, so what? Can I bounce back from this? Right. I think about, I was just listening to something the other day, and it was talking about all of the names that we know so well that failed miserably and then rebuilt, and we're enjoying their resilience today. Walt Disney being one. I did not know that Walt Disney went bankrupt. And did you know that?
I did not know that.
Went bankrupt the first time he tried to put into place what we now know and all love as one of the top destination. Well, let me not say we all love. Many people love the top destination of Disney as a place to go and enjoy and creative imagery. And he went bankrupt. But if he had the fear that this is going to be the end of the world, I will never bounce back from this, so many people would not enjoy Disney. It would not exist. And exactly what you said. Okay, if the worst thing happens, so what? And to your point, partner probably wasn't going to fire you if that had happened.
Yeah.
Putting it in perspective, and you articulated that in such a very consumable way that it's something that you guys can put into action immediately to help process through, okay, I'm thinking about it this way. So what if this happens? And to get through that and say, okay, if that happened, this is what I do. Most of that won't. Now I can move forward.
Exactly. And the confidence that comes with having thought that through, or the confidence that you build as you try things and discover that they don't kill you, and that, something unexpected comes up, because let's be honest, it does. When you're leading teams, no matter how carefully you plan, no matter how much you empower your team, how carefully you choose the people with the right skills and the right motivation and the right aptitudes, something goes wrong at some point. And, sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. But the confidence of knowing that, so what, you'll be able to handle it. You will figure out the next step. You might need help. It might take a couple of attempts. It might be a little bit messy. But you will figure it out, and you will be okay, and your team will be okay. At the end of it, that is worth going through the gauntlet a couple of times to gain, because it puts you in a position where you are so much better equipped to lead teams effectively. And that confidence that you have ripples out into the people in your team as well. seeing you as the leader, just knowing whatever happens, we will be okay, means that they see, oh yeah, I will be okay. Maybe I can try something new that I haven't done before. Maybe I can be that little bit bolder. Maybe I can step up. And that knock-on effect, as it goes back to that original thing. It makes everybody's experience better. And it definitely makes the results that you achieve as a team better, measurably better. Going back as well to this idea of like, oh, does this matter in a business world? Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
Because that attitude, that safety for people to try things and fail and to do better things next time is what drives truly exceptional results in your bottom line.
And that is why it's so important to have these conversations, to have someone such as yourself who can coach you through those moments and those thought processes, so that as you're leading, you know how to lean into the things that are really vital, that are really going to make the most impact, that are usually intangible. And the intangibles are what make the tangibles soar. And so that is what you're doing. One thought before we close, Charlotte. I think of this often and I laugh. I've heard it said that between a confident leader and a knowledgeable leader, if you were in a situation in a burning building where you didn't know anybody, you just happened to be in this building going to the post office, for example, and the building is on fire. And for whatever reason, everybody's in this room and nobody knows how to get out. The person who has the knowledge of the exits and the best possible route to get out and the fastest, who is shaky, who's not confident in their delivery of follow me, nobody will follow them. But the one who is confident, may not have a clue where they're going, but says, I can get you there, that's who people follow. Whether we're going to make it out alive or not. And so it's so important that we tackle the fears that we do have. We learn to build those muscle memory. And as you said, when you do something, there's nothing better than, there's no greater confidence builder than tackling something new, doing it, learning you can, and then moving forward. And that's what, when you address fear and the same fears come up, but each time you do it, you get more confident and you get quicker at it. And then okay, great. I know how to do this. And I love the ripple effect. Then everybody else feels like, okay, we know we can trust this person because they've shown through their experience that they can move forward. And so people should continue to have this conversation. And I think you're a great leader of that, which is why I want you to tell people how they can connect with you, Charlotte, how they can reach out to you, how they can work with you.
Yeah. So the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. My profile is just under my name, Charlotte Rooney, all one word, after the / / whatever it is that comes on the end of that. So that's the easiest way to find me. And you can find everything there is about working with me there. I work mostly one-to-one with individual leaders who are looking for support, but I also work with employers who are looking to provide support more holistically, more generally for the leaders that they have in their organization. So reach out to me. We will have a conversation about what that looks like for you, because it's so personal, right? I mean, there is a general trend. There are things that I know which need to happen for people, but just like healthy nutrition, there's some general guidelines that work for everybody. What you particularly enjoy and whether or not you happen to be allergic to avocado is something that we can only find out by having a conversation. So the best thing to do is find me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and let's chat.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you for your time today. And thank you for being in the space to help individuals overcome the fears that
Stop it, Jeeves. Oh no.